I'm Mara, 27 years old, and yesterday, I became a millionaire. My aunt, Beatrice B. Rowan, left me everything. Just over $2 million in liquid assets, her ivy-wrapped Victorian, and her controlling shares in Rowan Home Atelier. I was still learning how to breathe inside grief when the door opened and they walked in. My parents, the same two people who left me 14 years ago without a goodbye. They smiled like no time had passed. "We're your guardians," my mother announced, honey poured over a knife. Then, my lawyer stepped into the room, and both of their faces drained of color. Before we dive into this wild story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like if you've ever had to wrangle toxic family, and subscribe to join this storytelling crew. Okay, back to the beginning. There was a time when my life was ordinary, right up until I turned 12. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, the kind with thin walls and a neighbor who fried onions at 6 a.m. every day. My dad worked sales at a local car lot. My mom taught second grade at the elementary school down the street. We weren't rich, but we weren't starving either. Friday movie nights with microwave popcorn, summer camping trips in our sun-faded tent, Christmas mornings glowing with cocoa and cinnamon rolls. But there were signs. Small earthquakes that a kid's brain can't read as warnings. Whispered arguments behind a closed bedroom door. The way my dad took calls on the balcony, voice low, eyes scanning the parking lot. The overtime that sent him home smelling like cigarettes and bourbon instead of car polish. Dad liked poker with friends. At first it was friendly, harmless. Then the friendly games turned into weekends in Atlantic City. One night I heard my mom cry, pleading with him to stop before we lost everything. He promised, and Dad's promises were like coins. Easy to hand out, easy to lose. Mom changed too. Her smile went dim. Sick days multiplied until they weren't rare anymore. Curtains stained shut. The fridge thinned out. When I asked about groceries, she stared through me and told me to make do. Some afternoons she'd study my face as if trying to memorize it, then lock herself in the bathroom and sob where she thought I couldn't hear. I tried to be perfect. Straight A's, chores done without asking, 0 complaints about wearing shoes past their expiration date. I thought that if I could just be good enough, the planet would tilt back to normal. The Tuesday they left cleaved my life into before and after. October, too cold for early fall. I woke late, no mom's knock, no, you'll miss the bus. The apartment sounded wrong. Their bedroom door stood open. That door was never open on her bad days. The closet yawned, half the hangers bare. Dresser drawers gaped, a few socks slumped in the corners like abandoned pets. On the counter lay a single page in my mother's handwriting. "Mara, we can't do this anymore. Your Aunt Beatrice will take care of you. We're sorry." 14 years of my life condensed to 15 words. I called my mother's phone until my hands went numb. Voicemail. I tried my dad, and the number returned an automated shrug, no longer in service. I rifled through drawers for address books, emergency numbers, anything. Aunt B, my father's older sister, was a distant figure in our family lore. Stern, unmarried, a businesswoman in another state who didn't approve of our lifestyle. We'd met twice. I didn't know her number. I didn't even know if she knew I existed beyond a Christmas card photo. I spent that first night alone, curled on the living room couch, pretending I could hear keys in the lock, footsteps in the hall, a breath that meant they were back. I ate cereal dry out of the box and ran the TV for company until the screen sank into static dreams. On day 2, the landlord knocked about rent. I said my parents were away. He didn't believe me. He said the words, "Call social services," and something in my stomach cold. On day 3, I called my school counselor. She called Child Protective Services. The social worker who showed up, Miss Ellery, had kind eyes and a voice like a warm blanket. She made calls, pulled strings, and somehow found Aunt B. "Your niece has been abandoned," I heard Miss Ellery say into the phone. "Alternatives are foster care or..." A pause. "I understand it's sudden. She has no one else." Another pause. "Tomorrow morning would be best." Aunt B arrived the next day in a sleek black sedan that didn't belong on our cracked street. Pearl studs, charcoal suit, silver hair pinned into a precise knot. She looked at me with determination, not pity. She said, "Pack what you can carry," clipped, not unkind. "We'll ship the rest." While the paperwork bloomed and signatures multiplied, I filled a single suitcase with clothes and stuffed a backpack with photo albums and dog-eared books. I left the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling to shine over no one. The drive to Bee's house took 3 hours. She asked if I was hungry and where the nearest bathroom was at the next exit. I stared at the rear window and watched my world shrink to a gray thread. Guardianship is a maze, even for grown-ups. There were court dates, interviews with judges, more social workers, evaluations where you answer questions like, "How often do you feel safe?" and "Try not to cry." Through it all, Aunt B never wavered. She hired a real legal team. She showed up. My parents never did. The court tried to find them, then stopped. It was as if they had dissolved. Abandonment made scars I couldn't name. For years, I woke certain I'd heard the front door open and a voice clearing a throat to speak. I wrote letters I couldn't send. I scanned crowds for a familiar profile, a gait that matched a memory. Dr. Kaplan, the therapist B found me, told me something I didn't believe at first. Adults make adult decisions based on adult problems. Children blame themselves because it gives them the illusion of control. This was never yours to fix. By 17, I'd stopped turning at every Mara in a grocery store. By 19, I'd quit rehearsing reunions in the shower. By 24, I admitted to myself the people who had been my parents were gone in all the ways that mattered. B wasn't warm. She didn't do mush, but she was granite. She never broke a promise, never missed an appointment, never showed up late or half there. It wasn't the love I'd lost, but it was love. Her Victorian sat on 2 acres, behind wrought iron and hedges clipped with military precision. My bedroom was bigger than our old apartment, draped in velvet curtains with an antique 4-poster that looked like it could remember other centuries. The rules were many and enforced. Breakfast at 6:59, beds made before school, no shoes on hardwood, 1 hour of piano regardless of talent, homework at a desk, never on beds. Dinner conversation required 1 current event and 1 personal win. And TV on weeknights was a myth. I broke every rule in month 1. A quiet disaster of curfews and late homework, pushing the perimeter like a trapped cat. I expected a threat, "Pack your bag." It never came. B matched each infraction with a logical consequence. Late to breakfast? Kitchen closes at 7:30. Homework half done? Weekend plans canceled until it's done right. Sometimes, through the steel, a seam of softness showed. The night she found me crying over my parents' wedding photo, she didn't scold me for dwelling. She handed me a linen handkerchief and sat silent until I finished. When I tanked a math quiz after hours of studying, she didn't call me careless. She hired a tutor. B built her fortune from a small inheritance and willpower. She turned a local houseware shop into 30 elegant boutiques across 3 states. She worked long hours and still made it home for dinner, then tackled a second shift of paperwork. On some Saturdays, she would take me along to vendor meetings. "Watch who speaks first," she'd whisper before we walked in, "who concedes and who doesn't." Business is human psychology applied to commerce. When the public school discounted my potential as fine, she enrolled me in Willowbridge Academy. Small classes, high expectations. It felt like being dropped into a foreign language. I was behind. I built study groups with kids whose parents wore suits to breakfast. I earned my way into the conversation. When I tranked a math quiz after hours of studying, she hired a tutor when I cried over geometry proofs and begged to go back to normal. B said, "Your circumstances changed without your consent. Your response is entirely your choice. Use this or waste it. I don't invest in lost causes. It wasn't comfort, but it steadied me, like a handrail in the dark. By junior year, I rode the honor roll. College applications came with a fresh storm. I wanted state, where my friends were landing. B pushed for better. Your friends are choosing continuity. You need to choose trajectory, she said. Our biggest fight exploded over that fault line. I never asked to be your project, I shouted. I never asked to be your guardian, she replied, calm like ice. Yet here we are. I'm giving you options your parents didn't have. Silence. Then, for the first time, she told me about my father as a kid. She said, "He was brilliant," she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Could do math in his head like sorcery. Our parents couldn't afford college. He worked the gas station while I got the scholarship. He never forgave that. Gambling looked like a shortcut. Your mother was bright too, boxed in by life. I'm trying to break that box for you. I applied to 7 schools, got into 5, chose Northwestern for business and marketing. B paid, no drama. College peeled me open. Clubs, weird friendships, the sudden realization I had instincts for design and strategy that paired neatly with the financial spine B had given me. Summers, I interned at Rowan Home Atelier, learning inventory, margins, and the art of saying no without making an enemy. Distance made us closer. Our Sunday calls loosened. She even laughed sometimes. Small, fleeting, real. When I graduated with honors, pride flickered in her eyes. She shook my hand like I was a CEO and nodded once, as if to say, "Yes, exactly." I moved back in and took a marketing director role. 2 independent women sharing a roof and occasional dinners. I dated a little. B had a radar for distractions and a talent for asking one perfectly surgical question that made me rethink a fling. Then everything tipped again. 2 years earlier than I'm ready to remember, B was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Prognosis unkind. She faced it like she faced everything. Disciplined, unsentimental. "We all die," she said when I broke. "The only variables are when and how we use the time before." She worked while she could and slowly handed the reins to me. I became the one counting pills, managing appointments, insisting she eat more than 3 bites of soup. In those last months, something melted. One evening, as I helped her into bed, she squeezed my hand, eyes sharp and bright. "You were the daughter I wouldn't let myself have," she whispered. "Taking you in was the best decision of my life." 8 months after the diagnosis, she died in her sleep. The funeral was small. Colleagues, a cousin or 2, Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper who'd run B's home like a quiet clock for 20 years. She stood by the grave and understood. The person who'd raised me wasn't the person who birthed me. The house echoed after. I caught myself saving articles for her, listening for her footsteps, pausing outside her study like she might say, "Come in." 3 weeks after the funeral, a letter from Caleb Morton arrived. "Will reading Tuesday, 10 a.m. downtown. Interested parties present," he wrote. I assumed that meant me, maybe a long-time employee or a charity board. I got there early in a navy suit B would have approved of. Caleb's office smelled like leather and old paper. He greeted me, offered water, and said we were waiting for a few others. The door opened. Time tilted. My parents stood in the frame. They were older in the way stress ages you, fast and uneven. My father's once thick, dark hair had thinned into a gray map, his shoulders folded by some invisible weight. He'd put on at least 40 pounds, soft around the middle, breath whistling softly through his nose. My mother was sharper now, cheekbones stark, hair in a severe bob that didn't forgive the years. The smile she offered me was all teeth and no light. "Mars," my father said, as if the nickname might bridge 14 years of silence. "Look at you, all grown."
I stood before I knew I was standing. My mother reached for me. My body didn't move. Her arms circled air. "We've been trying to find you," she said, stepping back to examine the stranger she'd made. "You look so much like B, so sophisticated." "How did you know about today?" I asked. My voice sounded like someone steadier. "We saw the obituary," my father said, performing sadness. "We've kept tabs from afar. We knew you were with Beatrice." Of course they knew. Of course they never called. The room tilted. "Please sit," Caleb said smoothly, gesturing to the leather chairs. "We're waiting for one more." Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper, who'd run Bee's home like a quiet clock for 20 years, slipped in, took a seat near the window, and aimed a look of pure granite at my parents that I filed away to re-examine later. While we waited, my parents performed small talk like amateurs reading from a cold script. "We're in Azerone now," my mother offered. "Dry heat is better for your father's joints." "I manage a convenience store," my father added, which sounded both true and strategically humble. I nodded at facts and starved them of stories. Caleb cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Beatrice Rowan, henceforth B. I'll summarize the key provisions." My parents leaned imperceptibly forward, like flowers bending toward cash. "To my niece Mara Vale," Caleb read, "I leave the fullness of my estate. The property at 17 Ashbrook Lane with all contents and surrounding grounds, my controlling shares in Rowan Home Atelier, currently valued near $12 million, all bank accounts, investments, and cash, approximately $2 million. My personal effects, jewelry, art, automobiles, and all intellectual property pertaining to my business interests." The room went very quiet. The number wasn't what hit me. It was the shape of what she'd handed me. A life, a legacy, a name. My father coughed into his fist. "Is there anything else?" "There are modest bequests to longtime employees," Caleb said, nodding towards Mrs. Doyle, "and instructions for annual charitable giving from company profits. The bulk transfers to Mara, as stated." My mother touched my sleeve with a proprietary pat. "That's a tremendous responsibility for someone so young," she said sweetly. "Fortunately, as her parents, we can help." Caleb didn't blink, which I took as a sign he'd expected this pivot. My father slid into his line. "Legally speaking, since Mara was a minor when B took her, and as there was never formal termination of our parental rights, we remain her guardians. We'd be happy to assist in managing these assets until she has more life experience." A cold spike of panic went through me and out my fingertips. 14 years of absence repackaged as guardianship? I opened my mouth, but Caleb spoke first, tone gentle enough to be disarming. "I think there's some confusion about the legal status," he said. "Rather than rush, let's reconvene tomorrow so I can bring complete documentation. 2 o'clock. My parents exchanged a glance, agreement wrapped in calculation. "We're at the Westmont," they said. "Maybe lunch before, to catch up properly, Mars." Caleb stood, closing the folder. "If you'll excuse us, I need a few minutes with Mara on confidential matters." They hesitated, wanting to anchor themselves here with a longer sentence, but left. At the door, my father slid a business card into my hand. His and hers numbers scrawled on the back. "Anytime, day or night, we have years to make up." The door clicked shut. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since October of a different life. "They don't actually have a claim," I said, hearing the appeal I hated in my own voice. Caleb's face folded into something like concern mixed with reassurance. "Prepare for an unpleasant conversation tomorrow," he said. "B anticipated this. I need time to assemble everything she put in place." Mrs. Doyle stood as she passed me. She didn't touch, just hovered a hand near my shoulder. "Miss Mara, Miss B was nobody's fool. She buttoned every button." Then she slipped out. I ignored 3 calls from my mother on the way to the car. The fantasy I'd once nurtured, the door opening and the apology that made sense of everything, had walked into a paneled office wearing a bad smile. It broke like sugar glass.
Against Caleb's advice, and my better judgment, I agreed to dinner that night. Curiosity is a kind of hunger. It makes you choose restaurants you shouldn't. I picked an upscale Italian B had used for vendor lunches, neutral ground that served boundary setting with excellent bread. They were already seated. My father leapt to pull out my chair like a courtly reenactor. My mother had reapplied mascara and hope. We ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir, my father said. Your mother always loved it. I'll have water, I said, because some lines you draw small and early. For 20 minutes, we performed a clumsy dance around weather, work, and my life in headlines. They asked about Northwestern. I said it had been good. They asked about the business. I said it kept me busy. They asked about my friends. I said they were kind. All true. None of it a door. We owe you an explanation, my mother said finally, reaching for my hand. I kept both of mine on either side of the water glass like bookends. What we did, leaving, was wrong. We were in a bad place, my father added, voice lowered to the register people use for confessions they think will buy them something. I had gambling debts, bad ones. Your mother was ill with depression. We convinced ourselves you'd be better with B, stability, money. You had yourselves, I said softly. That's all I wanted. He looked at his plate. He said he got help. 8 years clean. Your mother found the right medication. We've built a modest life. We thought about reaching out, my mother said. Tears gathered professionally. But shame is heavy. The longer we waited, the harder it got. How did you know I was with B? I asked. We called social services 6 months after, my father said, and the phrase landed like a brick. After. They confirmed you were with family and doing well. We checked in again every few years. They had nursed their consciences on drip feed and called it care. The waiter arrived with plates, a merciful intermission. When he left, my father pivoted. B did well by you, he said, twirling pasta into metaphors. Now she's left you set. The house alone, what, $2 million in this market? He glanced at his mother like a cue. Plus the business, she added lightly. It's a lot for someone your age. I've been helping run the business for years, I said. Of course, my father soothed, but help isn't the same as full responsibility. Legal issues, taxes, those can bury you. Estate taxes can be crippling, my mother said, trying out a concern she'd learned at brunch. What are you asking for? I asked, amputating the pretense cleanly. They blinked, recalibrating. We're not asking for anything, my father lied. We want to be part of your life, to help. A beat. Though, if you wanted to help us get back on our feet, that would be a blessing. Mortgage, $70,000. She glanced at him. Plus medical, $30,000. An even 100, I summarized. Round numbers help the heart, I suppose. They brightened, not at the sarcasm, but at the clarity of a path they recognized. And what about my bill? I asked. 14 years of not knowing, the therapy, the nights I counted seconds until dawn. What's the line item for that? My mother's tears slipped their moorings, obedient. Money can't fix, but it can open a door, my father cut in, recalibrated again. Look, Bee's fortune came from the family seed money. Our parents set her up. I got nothing. I don't want to fight. I just feel included. Because blood. Exactly, he said, relieved by my translation. I thought of Bee, who had never once said I love you, and had proved it daily anyway. Blood means something. Actions mean more. Dessert was a negotiation I didn't order. By the time the check came, they'd floated 2 more debts and one suggestion that I install both of them at Rowan Home Atelier with respectful salaries, which sounded like 6 figures wearing humility as a disguise. Outside, my mother hugged me again, whispering, "Think about what family really means, sweetheart. We all make mistakes." I drove home through lights that turned green too quickly, then red too long. The story they'd told held fragments of truth, a depression I'd seen, absences I'd counted. But something in their timing and tenor felt practiced, rehearsed for the ear of a daughter they hoped was still 12. There was a blinking light on my landline, the one B had insisted I keep like a relic. A message from an unfamiliar voice. "This is Sandra Kenley. I worked with your parents at First National Bank years ago. I saw their names attached to an obituary notice. Please, call me before you make any agreements. There are things you should know." Sleep refused me. I fell down a guardianship law rabbit hole until the words blurred. Everything I read said their angle was flimsy, especially now that I was an adult. But Caleb's caution lingered, like a note left unresolved. At 3 a.m., I found myself in Bee's study. Lights low, dust motes like slow snow. Bee kept files like some people keep rosaries, ordered, reverent. In a locked drawer I hadn't opened, a folder waited with a label that clenched my throat. Veil. Inside, timelines, court papers, investigator reports with dates scrawled in Bee's tidy hand, and a sealed envelope with my name, the pen stroke firm enough to feel alive. I turned the envelope over in my hands, then set it carefully on the desk. I wasn't ready to break that seal alone and at 3 in the morning. But the other files, those I read until dawn. By sunrise, I knew more about the past than I had the night before, enough to walk into tomorrow's meeting with my spine straight. I arrived at Caleb's office early again, the folder under my arm like armor. My parents were already there, this time with a thin man whose hair was so slicked back it looked lacquered. "This is Gerald Hoffman," my father said, "our attorney. Just a precaution." "Of course," Caleb said, unbothered. His assistant wheeled in a cart stacked with expandable folders and a laptop. The conference room had the charged air of a courtroom without a judge. "Before we begin," Caleb said mildly, "let me clarify my role. I serve as executor of Miss Rowan's estate and was her attorney for 32 years. I also represent Mara through provisions Miss Rowan established. It appears there's confusion about legal status. Let's clear that up." Hoffman folded his hands. "My clients are concerned about their daughter's sudden control of substantial assets. As legal guardians, they have a responsibility to ensure proper management." "Excellent," Caleb said. "Here's the history." He opened a file and slid out documents with the quiet drama of a magician turning over cards that were always going to be hearts. When Mara came into Bee's care, temporary guardianship was granted through social court. Social services attempted repeatedly to contact you for permanent arrangements. After 6 months without success, a hearing was scheduled. Notices were sent to last known addresses and published as required. "We never received," my mother began. "Someone appeared on your behalf," Caleb continued, lifting another document.
A man named Louis Barker filed affidavits, allegedly signed by both of you, consenting to transfer permanent guardianship to Miss Rowan. We never authorized, my father started. Miss Rowan suspected as much. She hired a private investigator. She laid down reports. The investigator located you both in Nevada, Mr. Vale frequenting casinos, Mrs. Vale working as a cocktail waitress in the same establishments. When approached, you confirmed your desire to terminate parental responsibilities. The next day, Mr. Vale accepted a $15,000 payment from Mr. Barker. That was unrelated, my father said weakly, color slipping from his face. Caleb didn't pause. Miss Rowan commissioned annual check-ins thereafter. He tapped a stack. They document gambling relapses, evictions, collections. Also, 3 occasions when Miss Vale called Bee's home and hung up. 1 misaddressed email to Mara's college account.
I stared at the paper proof of near choices that never became actions. It hurt and healed at once. And this, Caleb said, finally touching the sealed envelope. A letter B left for exactly this situation. He handed it to me, my name and her script held steady in my hands now. "Would you like a moment alone?" he asked. I shook my head and broke the seal. "My dearest Mara," I read. "My dearest Mara," I began, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. "If you are reading this, it means I've gone, and your parents have reappeared. That is no accident. Over the years, they have contacted me several times, each time attempting to obtain money through you as leverage. The first time was 6 months after you came to live with me. Your father demanded $40,000 in exchange for not challenging the guardianship order. Against my better judgment, I paid him, fearing a custody fight would destroy what little peace you'd found." My mother made a faint sound, something between a gasp and protest, but I kept reading. "He returned 3 years later, claiming dangerous debts. I refused. I hired private security instead. When you were 16, your mother called, pretending to be terminally ill, begging for money for treatment. My investigator confirmed it was false. When you were accepted into college, they somehow found your email and asked for tuition money to rebuild their bond. I blocked them. I looked up. My father stared at the floor. My mother's face was white as porcelain. "I never told you these things," the letter continued, "because I wanted you to heal without the poison of resentment. I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they would change. But if they have returned now, it is for one reason: to access what they could not earn. They will use guilt, tears, and the idea of family as weapons. Be kind if you can, but be firm. Caleb has the documentation to protect you." I paused, swallowing the hard edge in my throat. "One final truth," I read aloud. "When you were 16, the court approved your adoption. I kept my surname and left yours unchanged, hoping one day reconciliation might be possible. But legally, you have been my daughter ever since. They have no claim to you or to my estate." I stopped. The words swam a little before settling into their meaning. She had adopted me. Bea had been my legal mother, and she'd never said a word. Caleb waited until the silence folded back on itself before speaking. He said, "We have certified copies of the adoption decree." He lifted another file. "Properly executed, filed in family court. Your aunt also documented every financial solicitation and every investigation report." He turned to my parents, his voice still gentle, almost academic. Miss Rowan anticipated potential interference. She included a specific clause in her will. Any legal challenge to her arrangements or her estate will result in all assets transferring to the Rowan Foundation for Displaced Youth. That would leave nothing for anyone to inherit. Hoffman, their attorney, paled. He leaned toward my father and whispered quickly. My father's expression went from shock to fury to calculation. "We didn't know anything about an adoption," he said tightly. "We were told guardianship, temporary." "By whom?" Caleb asked, eyes steady. "Social services," my mother said too quickly. "All social service communications are here," Caleb replied, tapping a folder, "including your signed consent forms. Both of you authorized permanent transfer of parental rights. The court also has record of payment you received afterward." "This is ridiculous," my father snapped. "You paid us off and stole our child." Caleb pressed a small button on the desk. "Security cameras record all meetings in this office, so please be mindful of statements that could constitute admissions." "This isn't over," my father barked, pushing to his feet. "We have rights." "Dad," I said quietly, testing the word, finding it hollow. "I found B's file last night. I know about the other families." He froze. "What other families?" "The ones you approached," I said evenly. "The Harpers in Denver, the Galinskis in Salem. You tracked down grieving relatives of wealthy people and pretended to be long-lost kin. You've been running the same pattern for years." My mother began to cry again, the kind of crying that didn't touch her eyes. "Mara, that's not true." "B documented everything," I said. "Phone recordings, signed receipts, even a photo of you two meeting that investor, Barker in Nevada. Did you really think she'd leave me unprotected?" My father's anger faltered into desperation. "Listen, sweetheart, there's been a misunderstanding. We can fix this as a family. We don't need—" "I think we're finished," I said, standing. "Caleb?" He nodded. "The estate is secure. Legally, they have no standing. I'll also file for a restraining order immediately." My mother reached across the table. "Please, just let us explain." "You had 14 years to explain. You waited until there was money." Caleb pressed another button. 2 uniformed security staff appeared at the doorway like punctuation marks. "These gentlemen will escort you out," he said evenly. "Any future contact must come through my office." "You can't do this," my father shouted. "She's our daughter." "No," I said. "I was your daughter. Now I'm B's." As they were guided out, my mother turned back one last time, eyes wet but unrepentant. "We gave you life. And she gave me everything else, including protection from people who confuse blood with entitlement." The door closed. For the first time since the will reading began, I sat without shaking. Caleb came around his desk instead of hiding behind it, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You should know," he said softly, "that I'm also your godfather. B asked me to take that on when she adopted you." That small sentence cracked me open again. Why didn't she ever tell me? "She was afraid you'd think she was replacing them. She wanted you to arrive at your own understanding of family." I said she influenced me more than anyone, just by staying. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "Would you like me to file for restraining orders now?" "Yes," I said. "That's best." When I left the office, the air felt different, lighter but raw, like a wound cleaned too recently.
I was halfway through making tea that evening when headlights swept across the front windows of B's house, my house now. A silver rental car idled in the driveway. For a moment, I thought maybe it was Caleb, but then the bell rang, repeatedly. I should have ignored it. Instead, I opened the door. They stood on the porch, the night air making ghosts of their breath. "You can't be here," I said, voice steady even as my pulse hammered. "There's a restraining order pending." My father's face darkened. "We're still your parents. You owe us a conversation without your lawyer whispering in your ear." "I owe you nothing," I said, "but you have 5 minutes to say what you came to say." My mother pushed past me into the foyer, scanning the entryway, her eyes glittering over the chandeliers and marble. "We just want to understand why you're being so cold," she said. "We made mistakes. We're trying to make amends."
By trying to seize my inheritance? I asked. That's a strange form of apology. My father entered too, ignoring my hand on the door. That woman poisoned you against us, he spat. Bee always resented me. She used you to hurt me. Bee saved me, I said. She gave me stability, education, self-respect, love without manipulation. My mother's voice trembled. We loved you, Mara. We were sick, depression, addiction. We needed help, not judgment. I was 12, I said. I needed parents, not excuses. They were silent. Do you know what it's like to wake up to an empty house? To check the mailbox every day for months, hoping for a letter? To think maybe you did something wrong so terrible your own parents vanished? My father's gaze dropped. My mother cried into her hands. You could have written, called, anything. Bee never once said she loved me, but she showed up every day. For report cards, doctor visits, nightmares. That's love. We're here now, my father said, slipping back into the tone of a salesman closing a deal. We can build something new. We can be a family again. You're here because Bee died wealthy. If she died broke, would you have even read her obituary? Their silence was an answer. Caleb showed me the investigator reports. You knew where I was for 14 years. You just didn't care enough to show up until there was money. That's not fair, my mother whispered. We were ashamed. Yet not ashamed enough to stay away when there was profit involved. Interesting how shame works. My father's voice rose again, sharp and bitter. You have no idea what it's like to live in poverty while your aunt sits on millions that should have been shared. Bee built that fortune herself. She worked 16-hour days for decades. What did you contribute? I'm her brother, he snapped. Biology isn't an entitlement program. You can't walk away for 14 years and then return with open hands. My mother collapsed into an antique chair, sobbing dramatically. How did you become so heartless? This isn't who we raised. You didn't raise me, I said, quietly. Bee did. At that moment, blue and red lights flickered through the front windows. The patrol Caleb had requested for safety checks. That'll be the police, I said. You should go now. My father grabbed my arm, fingers tight. You think this is over? He hissed. We can make things very difficult. We can tell stories that will tarnish your precious aunt. I pointed toward the security camera in the corner. Every word you've said is recorded. Bee installed those years ago, after your first extortion attempt. His hand fell away. This isn't worth it, he muttered to my mother. Let's go. They moved toward the door. At the threshold, my mother turned back one last time. You'll regret this when you're alone. Money can't love you. Family is everything. I agree. Bee was my family. They left, escorted by the flashing patrol lights, until their rental car turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did my legs give out and I sank to the floor, the house around me silent except for the faint ticking of Bee's grandfather clock. 14 years I had carried an unanswered question. Why did they leave me? Now I had my answer, and it was both heavier and lighter than I expected. The next morning, sunlight slid across the kitchen floor in thin gold stripes. I hadn't slept much, but I felt lighter, emptied out, as though the weight of my parents' ghosts had finally shifted off my chest. Around 9, Caleb called. His voice was calm as always, a steady hand across the line. They've been officially served with the restraining order. They can't contact you directly or come within 500 feet of your property. I leaned against the counter, tracing circles on the cool marble with my fingertip. They said it wasn't over. They could still try something. Press stories, smear campaigns. Empty threats, he said. We have every document and recording necessary to shut them down before they take a single step. Your aunt made sure of it. The evidence of their fraud and the recorded outburst in my office, if they make noise, they'll bury themselves. I exhaled, long and slow. I should have known she planned even for this. She planned for everything, he said, warmth in his tone now. B was the kind of person who anticipated storms and built a roof years in advance. After we hung up, the silence of the house wasn't hostile anymore. It just was. For the first time since the funeral, I noticed how the light caught in the stained glass panels of the foyer, how the floorboards creaked softly in places where B's footsteps used to echo. I wandered from room to room, memories hidden in every corner. The formal dining room where she'd quizzed me about current events over roasted chicken. The study where she taught me how to read balance sheets and predict market trends. The music room where my reluctant piano lessons filled Sunday afternoons. Eventually, I went upstairs to her bedroom, still untouched, still carrying her faint scent of bergamot and paper. On the nightstand was a small cedar box I'd never seen before. It wasn't locked. Inside, neatly arranged, was a life's quiet evidence. My report cards, photographs from school plays, certificates, newspaper clippings of every scholarship I'd earned, even the program from my college graduation. Each one carefully folded, preserved, and dated in B's neat handwriting. At the very bottom of the box, beneath the keepsakes, was another envelope. My name again, in her hand, but this time written on soft cream paper instead of the official stationery she used for legal letters. My chest tightened as I slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded it. Mara, it began. If you're reading this, it means the noise of the world has reached you again. By now, you'll know more about my choices than I ever managed to tell you. But there's one thing I never said aloud because I was raised to believe that feelings weaken discipline. I was wrong. I sat on the edge of her bed, the paper trembling slightly. I love you, not because duty required it, but because you became the kind of person I admire most, resilient, intelligent, unwilling to trade your integrity for comfort. You were never a replacement for something I'd missed. You were the gift I didn't know I needed. I didn't give you life, but watching you live it has been the greatest privilege of mine. The adoption was never about protection, though that was part of it. It was about truth. I wanted the world to know you were mine, not by blood, but by every choice that mattered. Whatever you build next, build it with your own name, your own fire. That will be your inheritance far beyond money. Be well, be wise, be happy. Mom.
That last word, simple, ordinary, enormous, broke something open inside me. B had never called herself that, not once. She'd always been your aunt, the steady hand, the teacher, the caretaker. But here, on paper that smelled faintly of cedar, she had claimed it at last. I cried until the paper blurred. Not the sharp tears of loss this time, but the strange, quiet grief that comes when you finally understand. 6 months passed. Life reshaped itself around the absence. The house no longer felt like a museum of B's discipline. It was becoming my home. I repainted the guest room a soft sage, replaced the heavy drapes with sheer curtains that let the mornings breathe. I left B's study intact, but added 2 monitors and a corkboard covered in plans for expansion. Under my direction, Rowan Home Atelier shifted into its next evolution. B's philosophy had always been about elegance and control, minimalist perfection. I added warmth, community collaborations, modern marketing, an online presence that doubled our customer base in less than a year. Every decision I made, I could hear her voice in the back of my head.
Think long term. People before profit. But never forget the numbers. The employees who'd worked under her for decades stayed loyal, some even calling me Ms. Mara, with a fondness that reminded me of Bee's influence. One afternoon, our head of operations, a man who'd known Bee since her first store, said to me quietly, "You sound like her sometimes, but you smile more." It was the best compliment I had ever received. Outside of business, I started the Beatrice Rowan Foundation, using a portion of my inheritance. Its mission was simple: to support children who had experienced abandonment or sudden family loss, the very thing that had once shattered me. We offered therapy, educational grants, and housing assistance for young adults aging out of foster care. The work grounded me. Every letter from a teenager we helped, every photograph of a new graduate who'd once been lost in the system, it all felt like something Bee would have nodded at silently, pretending not to be proud. Therapy continued too, less for pain now, more for understanding. Dr. Kaplan helped me untangle the complicated web of forgiveness, anger, and closure. "You know," she said one afternoon, "forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it just means putting down the weight of holding it shut." I thought about that for days, about whether I could ever forgive my parents, or if forgiveness even mattered anymore. 3 months later, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. Inside, a single page. "Mara, I don't expect you to respond. I know I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did. Not just leaving, but letting shame become an excuse to stay gone. I hope you find the happiness you deserved from the start. Mother." It was the first thing from her that didn't ask for something, just acknowledgement. I folded it carefully and placed it, unopened again, in the same cedar box where Bee's letter now rested. Some words don't need replies. They just need a place to live quietly. Over time, new rituals formed. Mrs. Doyle still came twice a week, though now she stayed for tea afterward. Sometimes she shared stories about Bee from before my time, how she was terrified the night I arrived, convinced she would fail. She taught me reading child development books at 3 in the morning, Mrs. Doyle told me once, smiling softly. She wanted to learn how to be the thing she'd never planned to become. Caleb visited monthly for dinner, slipping easily into the godfather role Bee had assigned him. "She'd be proud," he said one night as we went over the Foundation's first annual report. "Not just of the business, but of what you've built from it. She used to worry the past would harden you." I looked down at the report's cover, rows of young faces smiling beneath the words, "The Beatrice Rowan Foundation, Families Reimagined." I said, "It didn't harden me, it clarified me." He smiled. That sounds exactly like her. Romance for a long while had been something I set aside, too complicated, too unpredictable. But now, with the noise quieting, I found myself open again. Nothing serious, not yet, but enough to remind me that connection could exist without obligation. Bee's lessons echoed there too. Love is consistency, not convenience. Still, sometimes at night, I'd catch myself wondering where my parents were now, whether they'd moved back to Arizona, whether they thought of me. The ache wasn't gone, but it had softened, like scar tissue that only hurts when you press too hard. Because I understood now that their leaving said nothing about my worth. It said everything about their limits. Bee's staying had rewritten that story, page by page, until I no longer saw myself as someone left behind, but as someone chosen. One weekend, near the anniversary of Bee's passing, I drove to the cemetery with fresh lilies. Her grave sat beneath an old oak, the grass around it trimmed nicely by some kind soul. The black granite headstone read, "Beatrice Rowan, 1958 to 2023. Vision, integrity, grace." Beneath it, I had added one word after learning the truth of the adoption: Mother. I knelt, placing the flowers against the cool stone. I whispered, "You were right. Blood isn't what makes a family. It's who stays when everything else falls apart." A breeze stirred through the branches, carrying the faintest scent of cedar and lilac. For a moment, it felt like she was there, just watching, silent, steady, proud. I smiled. 6 months after that visit to Bee's grave, I finally felt like my life had shifted from survival to living. The heaviness of grief had softened into something quieter, like a steady pulse beneath everything I did. I still spoke to her sometimes, while making coffee, while walking through the garden, while signing new contracts at the office. It wasn't prayer exactly, it was habit. It was love, still finding its shape. Rowan Home Atelier continued to thrive under my leadership. We had opened 2 new locations, each one carrying a piece of Bee's disciplined elegance and my own softer signature. The employees trusted me now, not just as Bee's niece, but as the rightful successor. When clients came into meetings, they often said, "You remind me of Beatrice." And I always smiled. I learned from the best, and I meant it. The foundation had grown beyond what I had imagined. We'd partnered with local schools, offering scholarships for students who'd aged out of foster care. We'd hired counselors and mentors, some of them former foster kids themselves. I visited the center every Friday. Seeing the children, wide-eyed, nervous, hopeful, felt like stepping back in time and offering comfort to the girl I once was. One afternoon, a teenage girl named Janelle asked me, "Does it ever stop hurting when your family leaves you?" I looked at her and thought of Bee, of her quiet strength, of the long nights I had cried alone in that apartment waiting for a knock that never came. I told her it doesn't stop hurting, but it stops controlling you. The hurt becomes something else, a reason to build, instead of something that breaks you. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. That moment stayed with me for weeks.
About a year after the confrontation with my parents, Caleb called unexpectedly one morning. His voice was steady but hesitant. "There's something I should tell you," he said. "Your parents left Arizona a few months ago. Apparently they filed for bankruptcy. Their attorney reached out to transfer some personal items Bee might have wanted you to have. Letters your mother kept, photographs." I felt an ache that was more pity than pain. "Do they want contact?" "No," he said. "Their lawyer says they're embarrassed. It seems life hasn't been kind to them." "Life was never kind to Bee either," I said quietly. "She just worked harder." Caleb didn't respond right away, then said, "I thought you'd want to know." I thanked him and ended the call. Staring out the window for a long time, I imagined them somewhere far away, the desert stretching endlessly outside a small apartment window. Once that image would have gutted me. Now it just made me grateful for the distance. That night, I pulled Bee's final letter from the cedar box again. The ink had faded slightly, but her words still felt alive. "Build it with your own fire." I traced that line with my thumb. Maybe I already was. The seasons turned, and so did I. 2 years after Bee's passing, the house was no longer a mausoleum of memory, but a home layered with new life. I hosted small dinner gatherings, nothing lavish, but full of laughter. I had started dating again, carefully, the way one tests a bridge before stepping fully onto it. His name was Daniel, a quiet, thoughtful architect who loved old buildings and hated small talk. He didn't ask about my parents at first. When he finally did, months later, his question was simple. "Do you ever think about letting them back in?" I thought about it honestly before answering, "Sometimes." But then I remember what Bee said. Family is built through care, not guilt. If they ever come back, it has to be as people willing to earn trust, not as ghosts demanding it. He nodded, not pushing further. That's what I liked about him. He understood the difference between curiosity and intrusion. A year later, the foundation held its first major gala, the Homeward fundraiser. I gave a short speech beneath strings of soft white lights, surrounded by people who had once been strangers, but now felt like threads in a larger family.
I used to think family was something you were born into. Now I know it's something you build. One act of kindness, one choice at a time. My mother taught me that blood isn't what keeps people together. My mother by choice, not by birth. There was a small murmur, people who knew B smiling at the reference. I continued. Her name was Beatrice Rowan, and she believed that true legacy isn't about wealth or property. It's about the people who carry your values forward. Tonight, each of you is part of that legacy. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was warm, human. The kind of applause that fills a room with quiet pride. I knew she would hate the attention, but I also knew she'd be proud. A week after the gala, I visited her grave again. The oak above it had grown fuller, branches swaying softly in the evening wind. I knelt to brush a few fallen leaves from the stone. "I think you'd like how things are going," I said. "The foundation's helping more kids than I imagined. The business is steady. I even started seeing someone. You'd approve." He doesn't waste words. The silence that followed felt peaceful, not empty. I realized then that B hadn't truly left. She just changed form. From the woman who once stood behind me during school recitals, to the voice that now lived in the back of my mind whenever I made a decision. As I stood, I noticed another bouquet already placed beside the lilies I'd brought. Wildflowers, fresh, with a simple card. "Thank you for raising her right." There was no name, just that single line in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. For a second, my heart stuttered. Could it be my mother? Someone from the foundation? Caleb? It didn't matter. The gesture, like so many things in life now, didn't need an explanation. Gratitude speaks loud enough on its own. That night back home, I walked through B's garden, the one she had loved but never had time to enjoy. The moonlight glimmered on the pond's surface, the air filled with the soft hum of crickets. I thought about everything she had given me. Not the money, not the mansion, but the blueprint for a life built on strength and clarity. For years, I had defined myself by what I'd lost. Now, I was defined by what I'd built. I looked up at the sky, the stars faint behind a thin veil of clouds, and whispered, "I'm okay now, Mom." For the first time, saying "Mom" didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. As I closed the story in my mind, my story, I realized how far I'd come from that frightened 12-year-old waiting for parents who would never return. B had taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes love doesn't look like the people you expect. Sometimes it arrives late, stern, and wearing a gray suit. But it stays. If you've listened to my journey this far, maybe you've lived your own version of it, waiting for someone to come back, trying to understand why they left. Maybe this is what you needed to hear. Their leaving doesn't define your worth. The people who stay do. So if you've ever had to rebuild your definition of family, or if you've ever chosen yourself after being abandoned, this story is for you. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for remembering with me that sometimes the family we choose gives us the love we were always meant to have. If this story touched you, like and subscribe for more true life stories of strength, survival, and second chances. And tell me in the comments, what does family mean to you? Because for me, family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stays.